Welcome. I would like to start by telling you why I made this video and why you should watch it so that you can decide whether you want to watch the whole video or not. So, when I was 9 years old, which was many, many years ago, so I was in Sindhya School, Gwalior, in the junior school in the fifth grade. And my headmistress, Mrs. Lakrawala, told us that we were to write an essay which was titled, If I Were the Prime Minister of India. Now, I do not remember what exactly I wrote at that time, but whatever I wrote impressed the headmistress so much that she really gave me a lot of praise and made a big deal about it in the school, and everybody knew that, and they probably read my essay. I felt very good as a 9-year-old child. So now in a post-COVID world, there is an opportunity for India to do some shock and awe reforms where the situation would be similar to the 1991 reforms. So I thought I would again make this video which said that if I were the Prime Minister of India, what would be the shock and awe reforms that I would do? Now, I must put a caveat, since I'm like 63 years old, and I'm no longer looking for appreciation. As a 9-year-old, I definitely was. I felt very good. But in this particular video, I would like people like me who have been quite successful and have no reputation to protect to answer this question. If they were the Prime Minister of India and they believed that India needed shock and awe reforms, can they make their own video? And the other aspect is that people who do have reputations to protect, like leading industrialists, leading thinkers, and so on and so forth, can they also make similar videos where they say, okay, like me, they are giving ideas some of which may be useful and some others could be discarded. Because when you're giving ideas, when you're answering this question, if I were the Prime Minister of India, then it's very easy for you to be a backseat driver. You have no responsibility. And it's quite easy, to kind of say this should be done, that should be done, criticize here. So in all humility, I'm trying to give my 2 paisa just so that these could be inputs which the Prime Minister of India could probably look at. And if some of these are useful, then he may act on them. And if a lot of people do this, then I think the collective power of 1 billion minds will surely make a difference, and we will get shock and awe reforms. So with that, I would like to start off with sort of one word on the existing reform package that the Prime Minister and then later the Finance Minister elaborated. And if the package was shock and awe reforms, then there would be a one-word reaction, and that would be wow. And I, at least, do not get that reaction. I don't say wow. I say I'm confused. So with that said, let me move on to my first mantra, which is market not planned. And let me explain what I mean by that. So India for very long has had socialist roots and has more or less believed in a planned economy with the public sector commanding the heights of the economy. Slowly, that has been whittled away, but those remain. So if you look at the recent reforms, and I don't want to belabor this point, there is a package which is there for MSME, for micro units, for big units, and so on and so forth, and it is quite large. Yet at the same time, there are very many small things, including like 500 crores for beekeepers, where there are 2 lakh beekeepers which are going to benefit. So the average disbursement would be 25,000 rupees for beekeepers. Now, if this is not an example of a planned economy, then I do not know what it is, right? So there is no faith that the beekeepers, if they needed this money, could use the packages already announced for micro units and could actually access that money. But instead, they have to be given some specific money because somebody somewhere in the planned economy has decided that the beekeepers of India need 500 crores, right? So this is what, to me, when I said I'm confused and my reaction is not wow, this is what I mean as one example. Okay, so I believe that if I was the Prime Minister of India, I would give a very clear signal that we are moving to a market economy, and we will of course regulate it because markets can go out of hand, but we are not going to do a planned economy where we give a little bit for this and a little bit for that, and so on and so forth. Okay, so moving on to the next mantra, which is very important. So people talk about the platform revolution, and it's almost said that the next 20 years, and COVID, if anything, is going to accelerate that, are going to be the decade of platforms, like the previous 20 years was the decade of the internet. And using platforms and enabling platforms, could India attract $100 billion plus FDI annually? Now, of course, Facebook and all have come in and they've invested certain amounts, but India needs a lot more. And what are these platforms? So separately on my YouTube channel, I've detailed out 11 platforms. But here, I'm going to just give the example of one related to the market reforms just announced. So there is 100,000 crore grant package funds which are available for what is called farm gate infrastructure support. I don't know exactly what it is, but there's 100,000 crores available. Now, if instead of this, there was, like was done with telecom, where there was a system set up where licenses were given, circles were given, maybe there were rollout targets, and the private sector was invited to come in and bring in a lot of capital and build out the telecom infrastructure. Now, why couldn't this be done in agriculture? So, or food. So food would include dairy, would include fisheries, and so on. So if that was the model, then maybe the government would not have to spend this 100,000 crores. Maybe they'd have to spend a little less, and there would actually be a lot of capital which would come in, and they would ask the people who are bringing in capital, what can we do to have shock and awe reforms in agriculture? Can we talk about removing marginal farming? Can we talk about an agricultural tax? Things which are like absolutely taboo and still are taboo in India. So this whole idea of, which I will also cover later when I come on to the last point, which is spend on enabling infrastructure, is that we have to ask ourselves that where is it that the government needs to spend, and where is it that it can be enabling and get the private sector to spend, and it could actually make money as it did in telecom. So there are at least 11 such areas that I've identified in my YouTube videos where the government could do this. So moving on to the next point, which again, I think would be quite controversial, but I think India can show the way towards a new social contract. And this is adding individual responsibility to corporate social responsibility. Now, of course, the fact that India has mandatory corporate social responsibility has been debated, and a lot of people feel it's not a good thing. But what I am proposing, if I were the Prime Minister of India, would be to basically say that there's going to be an Indian welfare trust, and all CSR and all what I'm going to talk about, IR, which is individual responsibility, monies will be put into this trust. Okay, and this trust will spend on welfare. Okay. If this trust doesn't have enough money, as in the next point, the government would spend to bridge that welfare gap. But essentially, all the social responsibility would be towards social welfare. And one of my friends pointed out and came up with this phrase called a social harmony wealth transfer. So if this was whatever level is set for companies for CSR, but above a market cap of X, 1% of the company's wealth would be transferred to this trust. And maybe it could be like shares, and the trust wouldn't have to pay capital gains. Similarly, wealthy individuals, say maybe people who have more than 1 crore, for the excess above 1 crore, they would transfer 1% of their wealth, which could again be an appreciated shares or appreciated property or whatever, to the trust. And then the trust could sell it and pay no capital gains and use that money for welfare. Now, just to sort of make this real, so Mukesh Ambani's wealth, whom I admire greatly for having created so much wealth, is supposed to be around 3,80,000 crores. So if Mukesh was to transfer 1% to this trust, Mukesh would transfer 3,800 crores. Now, if there was a person who had, say, 2 crores of wealth, then they would essentially have to transfer 1% of 1 crore, which would be the excess over of 2 crores over 1 crore, and basically transfer 1 lakh to this trust. So as long as this 1 crore number could be set such that the number of people who transfer are at least 5% of the population. So this number could be adjusted up or down. Now, why should the people do this social harmony wealth transfer? So if I were the Prime Minister of India, I would try and convince them and say that this is for your own good. So we do not want to create any barriers for people to create immense amounts of wealth. But the people who create that wealth should look at everybody as their children, not just their own children, and try and pass on the wealth to their own children and create this sort of family thing of passing on wealth. Because there is no problem if a person creates a huge amount of wealth, they deserve all of it. But if you inherit wealth, then in quite a few cases, that is a recipe for disaster. And of course, there are a few very, very wealthy families which have spanned many generations, and they control a lot of the wealth in the world. But is that right? Right? Just because, say, Mukesh was a great person, should his children and should their children's children, forever enjoy the benefits of that wealth? or should they transfer that wealth for social harmony? Because if social harmony is not achieved, then there may be a violent wealth transfer, which would be not really in the interest of those who have achieved a lot of affluence. Okay, coming to my next point, which is spending on the welfare gap. Now, in India, there has been a tradition, and this cuts across religions, of having the equivalent of dharmshalas, which take care of people who are either mentally challenged or physically challenged, or just want to be monastic, like they want to do religious studies or whatever. They want to be like sadhus who live on alms given by other people, and they want to pursue God, or trying to get closer to God or understand God, whatever. Now, for all these people, if they were put in dharmshalas and they were taken care of so that they could lead a life of dignity, and this welfare trust spent on running these dharmshalas very effectively, so those who contributed to this welfare trust would actually appoint a CEO, and this would be run like a very, very professional organization. It would not be run by the government, because the government should not have to concentrate on welfare. A really well-run trust could do welfare much, much better than the government can do. So now, one of the problems which no country, to my knowledge, has been able to solve is how do you get people to not get addicted to welfare? Because if somebody is giving you 3 square meals a day and things like that, why would you want to work? And why would you want to work hard and want to work on a minimum wage job? So there has to be thought about some restrictions on what you get in welfare and what you get outside welfare. So there has to be an incentive to move off welfare. One of the things could be that you are free from whatever restrictions are there on welfare. So when you live, say, for instance, a monastic life, there are a lot of restrictions that the monastery imposes on you. And so if you do not want to be a monk, or you are not autistic, or you are not a drug addict, then you probably will not want to be in this welfare dharmshala type of environment, and you would like to be part of the free environment where you could, but then you have to fend for yourself. And also, if there is the availability of very cheap credit, which is another thing that I have talked about in my videos and stuff that I've written on, as to how credit could be extremely cheap and still very, very profitable for lenders. That could be your path to create a lot of wealth, to the extent that you want to create wealth. And how we can have sustainable JFA. JFA stands for Sustainable Jobs for All. Now I'm coming to the last point, the spend on enabling infrastructure. Now, there may be certain infrastructure like public health infrastructure, etc., where it does not make any sense for the private sector to spend on building this infrastructure, because there is no business model around building that kind of infrastructure. So those are the kind of things, like in these reforms, there's talk about making the atomic energy research, which was done with public money, available for entrepreneurs to work on, similar to what was done by NASA in the US, and similarly on space research. Now, these are very good things. If there is some stuff which is done with public money, it should be available for the public to build on. And that is the meaning of infrastructure. So infrastructure should always be built based on it being available for the common good if it's built by the government. And also, the government should constantly ask itself, saying, should I be building this infrastructure, or can I attract platform builders to come and build the infrastructure for me so that they can build the infrastructure for the globe, for humanity? And I don't need to own the intellectual property. All I want is to get some taxes and whatever is due to me for creating this enabling environment, which enable these platform companies to become very big and become very global. So that's it. So I've told you what I would do if I were the Prime Minister of India, and what would be the shock and awe reforms, which I think would make you go, wow. But I would encourage all of us who are friends of India, whether we live in India or we live outside, to uh, give their views on, if they were the Prime Minister of India, what would be the shock and awe reforms they would do. Because COVID-19 is clearly a crisis, maybe one of the biggest crises, at least in my lifetime, in there. And like someone said, a crisis is a terrible thing to waste. And I hope India does not waste this crisis. I'm a little worried that it will, and that we will keep having a confused, quizzical expression instead of a wow expression. I hope we can transform the question mark into a wow. Thank you very much for listening to me.